we do like to have new members of staff come on and just give us a flavour of kind of what they're interested in and what they'll be doing. And Parmjit has come from Leicester de Montfort, and she has been a publishing academic. And to me, she's got a strange mix of quantitative and qualitative in her approach. She says she's definitely not operations research. We had this discussion, but she's got a kind of qualitative feel as well, I think. So very interested to see what she's got to say in this presentation. And thank you very much again. And over to you.
Okay, thanks, Nigel. Thanks. Yeah, so I'd say I'm sort of soft operational research, really, and maybe some of that might come out in the presentations that I'm going to sort of talk through today. Okay, but thank you, colleagues, for coming along to this presentation. I'll just, hopefully you can all see my slides. I'm just going to put it on presentation mode to make it a little bit larger for us to view. Right, okay, so the title of the presentation and the work that I've done is Capturing the Participant's Voice Using Causal Mapping Supported by Group Decision Software to Enhance Procedural Justice. So, I mean, that's actually sort of quite a lot in the form of a title. So I think it might be useful if I break it up. But what I'll do in the presentation today is that, first of all, I'll talk about, what I've done in terms of the work. It'll also cover the how of how I've undertaken the work and what's happened as a result, what the results have been, and also to give a little bit of a context, to talk about the literature in which the sort of work is embedded. So with the title here, there's really sort of three bits to the title. We're talking about capturing the participant's voice. So in the work that I've done, I've undertaken group workshops with stakeholders. Any stakeholders that are important in a group decision. So this could be students, or it could in fact be private organisations where you have a senior management team and they want to get together to come to a collective decision, but they want everyone to participate in that. So they want sort of all the voices to be transparent. The methodology that I use is causal mapping. So it's a very visual methodology, and it's a soft operational research approach, the approach of causal mapping. And it's supported by some software, which is group decision software. So basically it's me as a facilitator using this software to undertake group workshops. And in my research, what I've done is I've tried to link it to the notion of procedural justice, which comes in organisational literature, with procedural justice really being talking mainly about how to make the process of decision making fair for all of the participants. So over the years, when I was doing some consultancy work for my university, I myself and my colleague, because at the time I used to work with a colleague to run the workshops. They're quite busy workshops, so actually two people working on it made it much more productive. We undertook workshops with quite a number of organisations in the private sector. So some of them were very large multinational institutions like PepsiCo International and Tata Steel. We did quite a lot of work. I did quite a lot of work with an organisation called Oasis, which was a dental healthcare organisation. And we looked at how to transform their business over a number of years. But some of the other private sector businesses here are actually quite small, based in the local economy. So yes, the process is something which is transferable between sectors, and it has been used in the public sector and for organisations that operate on a not-for-profit basis. So let's have a look here. I would say that I did quite a lot of work for the Operational Research Society itself. And within that, there's a special interest group, which is to do with problem structuring methods, PSMs, that uses soft operational research. So at that time I was quite active in the OR Society and sort of working with them. And then we had sort of charities that I worked with, such as the Leicester Her Day charity, which was a charity led by a group of females who were trying to develop charitable work within the Leicestershire economy. And of course, because at the time I was based at De Montfort University, I also worked with our own students, and I undertook some work for our senior executive leadership team at the time as well, looking at students and what the students' voice was talking about. So today I've decided that, you know, just to summarise, I'll talk about two workshops that I've undertaken. One was with a group of students at De Montfort University. They were Black and ethnic minority students, and this workshop was set up to examine their academic performance. The students that undertook the workshop process were ones that had self-selected to come along and engage. So they weren't kind of picked out. Information was given about this this opportunity to come and represent, you know, what they wanted to talk about and to give them a voice. So they decided if they wanted to join, and I did a workshop with them. In comparison, Coating is a small enterprise in Leicestershire, and they were a private sector organisation that came to us as a senior management team that wanted to kind of develop their business. So two different sort of groups here were involved in the work that was undertaken. Okay. So I've mentioned this term causal mapping, which is a very visual process, and one of the things which is very important in the causal mapping process is we start off the group workshop with what's called a prompt question. So there were two questions which were relevant to our two groups examined. So for the students, the question that we started discussing with them is, in what ways can DMU better help achieve your expected level of academic performance? For the private organisation, what they were interested in is they wanted to meet their goals for volume sales, cash flow, service levels, and they wanted to examine this over a kind of a three-year period. Now, starting these workshops with the prompt question, it's very, very important to get the prompt question right. As you can see, they are open questions. They're sort of ones that will hopefully elicit quite a bit of information. But because causal mapping falls under the realm of problem structuring methods, this is why it's so important to get the prompt question right, because before you can get good strategic outcomes or evaluations which can be implemented, you have to be able to formulate the problem itself properly and correctly. So we spend quite a lot of time, I've spent quite a lot of time in the work that I've done, making sure that the prompt question is the right one to start the discussion with in the groups. The problem needs to be correctly formulated to get the right outcome. Right, so what's the background for the work that I've done? So most of the work is relating to the sort of body of work which has been undertaken by academics that are sort of almost the founding fathers in the field of sort of causal mapping, and this is Eden and Ackerman. They have a book which is referenced here, Group Decision and Negotiation and Strategy Making. And their work in this field tends to emphasize that if you want to develop strategy, then using a group support system is helpful. So here's a quote: "There are design characteristics of group decision support systems that can importantly make strategy making more effective and likely to be delivered." Okay, so here we have the an excerpt from page 122 of the book, and you can see that what we've got here is essentially what's called a directed map. We've got some statements, which often we refer to as concepts. These terms, these sort of small terms in the sort of rectangles here. And then we've got some arrows which are linking the statements, and these arrows show you a cause and effect kind of relationship, depending on where you're starting from one statement and going to another. So in the middle here, what we're trying to examine is support for managing a new negotiated order and a new social order. So when we have organisations or businesses that want to undertake an initiative, or they want to move forward in some way, what is the best way to support them? So the work that I've done focuses on three of the aspects that feed into supporting that kind of managing process, which is here. So the group decision support system is basically, this is some software which we use, which I've used to undertake the group workshops with students or with companies. We tend to focus on what we can do to make the participants in those group workshops feel that the process that we have is a very fair process, so that they are comfortable to engage in that process. And you know, the background to this is in organisational justice literature, there is this concept of procedural justice or fair processes. And if you have a fair process, then the participants will feel more engaged in the group workshop. If they're supported by a group decision support system as well, then this is all helping to feed into, you know, producing better strategy, better outcomes to be implemented. Okay. So looking at the process characteristics, how exactly does causal mapping work? How do the group workshops actually sort of work? So when I used to do this previously, we had rather old technology. So we used to have about 10 physical laptops that were all interconnected together in terms of they were hardwired and connected together. And participants, individual participants, would sit at the laptops and be able to input their own thoughts on the prompt question that they'd been asked to think about. What the software does is that it allows them to anonymously put in their sort of thinking. And in this sense, what we're doing is we're allowing them to have a free voice, because they don't need to self-censor, because nobody else can see what they're putting in, and there's no way really of identifying who puts in what at that particular point. Especially for the participants themselves, they can't identify within themselves in a group who's inputting what. The group support system which we used was called Group Explorer. And what this does is it collects all of the information in one place, and we used to sort of display it on a very large screen in the room that we were operating, and everybody would be able to look at the information on the screen and try to understand collectively what the contributions of the participants were. So by looking at it as a whole group, you know, the idea is that over time, and it does take a bit of time for the process to work, for the facilitator to work with through the process, you get a kind of a collective group understanding. So causal mapping, if you look at the sort of literature on causal mapping and using causal mapping, especially in groups, it's said to sort of deliver quite a lot of good things. You know, if it's done well with trained facilitators and you know, and using the software as well, it can get over quite contentious issues and help to develop consensus within groups. The kind of things that I've worked more heavily on is to ensure that you know, all the stakeholders have a very open voice and their opinions are heard. It can help in resolving conflict. Obviously, if it's building consensus, you're moving the group towards thinking through a problem to get to an agreed solution. So that's very helpful. And often it's very good at looking at complex strategic issues, you know, issues which are often called messy issues, which are difficult to sort of comprehend solely through conversation. So having this kind of visual representation is a way to work through a messy problem, break it up into small visual units, which we can examine part by part. It can also be used to develop the understanding of a group in terms of aspirations or goals. You know, what's the vision and how is this organisation going to deliver its vision? Depending on how much work we do, you know, it can be, you can also undertake kind of feasibility analysis and get outcomes in terms of KPIs and so forth, if you take the process to the final conclusion. Okay, so if you imagine, you know, how a causal mapping workshop actually works, what you'll find is that it always goes through a set number of standard stages, as it were. So first of all, when you have the participants, be they a group of students, let's just say 10 students, they're sitting in a classroom with their individual laptops and they're putting in their thoughts on what can improve their academic performance. When they put in their ideas, we say what we do, is the first stage, is gathering their ideas, it's surfacing their thinking, and we encourage them to contribute equally. So the facilitator can see how many statements each student is entering. So if there's one student who maybe has only put in 1 or 2 and everybody else has put in 8 or 9, you know, you can prompt them and say, look, you know, everyone should put in about 8 or 9 statements. If you haven't, think about what else you could contribute. So you get this kind of gathering of ideas at the start of the process. The software then takes that information and visually we can project those statements onto a large screen for everybody in the group to see. Then you end up with quite a lot of information, which is just sort of randomly dotted around everywhere. So it's difficult to work with it. The next stage is to take that information and basically ask the group to read all the statements and say to them, can you think of any particular clusters or themes that appear to be coming out from what the groups inputted? You know, so the students might say, oh yes, we can see there's some things here to do with assessment. So you can, you know, you can cluster some of the statements into an assessment cluster. They might say, oh yes, a lot of it is to do with group work. You know, we don't particularly like group work. So then you can say, right, let's take this group work and cluster that into a different sector. And then it helps to kind of break up all the thinking into these smaller themes or clusters. And when we work on each cluster individually, rather than looking at the whole kind of messiness of the picture. To try to order the process and make it a little bit quicker, we say that we're going to ask you to rate which cluster you think is most important. What's a really important thing that you need to discuss and for us to work through with you? So there's a kind of a rating process that students, again, it's anonymous, and they put in their preferences and they tell us that, you know, what we really want to do is we want to look at the assessment cluster first because that's most important. But because it's all done anonymously, we're trying to, you know, sort of make sure that the process is fair for everyone, and that one person's voice doesn't dominate the conversation and is led, you know, by one person steering the conversation. And then we'll end up with a group of clusters, but then we have to work with the clusters and try to create a causal map, a kind of a directional map, which embodies the thinking of the group. And one of the most important things in creating these maps is to put in these links between the statements, the cause and effect links. And this is something which can take quite a long time with the group, but when they do it, because it's all to do with their thinking and that it represents their understanding on the key area that they're talking about, it becomes, you know, they take a kind of an ownership on it, and they kind of, that's where the consensus building comes out, because it's something that's developed collectively, and, you know, they all feel that they have a part to play. Okay, so this is a causal map. It's very small, so I do apologize for that. I might come out of display mode and just focus on a few things. But overall, if I can just give a brief summary, I mean, these are all the statements that are typed in by the students. The number in front of them is nothing other than the order in which it went into the system. You can see that we have these cause and effect links that have been put in. Now, the students themselves would tell us that that link needs to be put in because it has to come from their understanding. Yeah, and what we do is we try to make these causal maps, they're directed maps, we try to make them hierarchical, because at the top we have what's referred to as the goals of the examination. So the students themselves said they want to enhance their transferable skill. They saw that as a goal, so we put that to the top. Also, they wanted to achieve their expected academic qualifications. So again, that was another goal. So we put that at the top as well. And then certain statements, when they look at them, they can say, oh, we've got some important things happening here, some key statements. So to bring them out of the map, we give them a different font, and we can make them bolder. So if I can just escape out of this one for a second and make it a bit larger, hopefully, for us all to see. So okay, so down here we can see that statement 64, some student has said that individual favoritism by tutors happens. This causes or links to certain groups get favored by tutors, and then this can link into, well, it should, there is less favoritism within group work. What have we got here? Some students get marginalized within groups. This links to group work doesn't represent the ideas of the whole group. This links to group work doesn't accurately reflect the ability of the students. And here there is, you can't quite see it because it's too small, which is why I'm trying to enlarge it for you. But there is a negative link on this arrow because the group understands, and we all understand, that if group work doesn't affect the ability of the students in the group, it's not going to help them achieve the academic qualifications. So we have a negative causal link there. Okay, so I mean, this is, you know, this is just typically what a causal map would look like, and this is one of the maps that we created with our students. Okay, where are we now? Fairness. All right. Okay. Right. So I mean, undertaking the workshops with students and with private sector organisations is something that we did when we had some high funding to engage with organisations, to sort of take some to engage in some knowledge transfer from the university to organisations that wanted to engage with us. So I then needed to think about, well, how I could use this from a research point of view. And this is where the examination to do with fairness in group decision making came about. So looking at the literature, When we talk about fairness in the literature, the first type of issue of fairness which received quite a lot of examination was distributive justice. Now, distributive justice is essentially to do with, well, what am I going to get out of this negotiation? It's the end aim, and what do participants receive from it? Well, that is not the area that I chose to focus on, because outcomes are sometimes unpredictable, and it was more useful because of the kind of process I was using. It seemed to me that the better thing for me to do was to concentrate on procedural justice. So procedural justice is to do with the procedures or the processes that lead to those outcomes. And this is essentially what my research tended to focus on. I was trying to make a link between group decision support systems involving software and facilitation, and say that this is a very fair process which allows better outcomes when groups get together to make decisions. Okay, so this is essentially which led into the sort of work that I've undertaken for the last couple of years. I decided to make a connection, build some kind of a connection between procedural justice aspects or dimensions and the process that I used in these group workshops. And the process was called, or I termed it, myself and my colleague, and we're working on it at the time, we termed it the dual facilitation process. The reason why we called it the dual facilitation process is because it involves human facilitation, which effectively is kind of a craft skill that you build up over years of experience, undertaking this kind of process of facilitation. But we don't do the facilitation independently. We do use group decision software, so we're combining the two things together. And I could see that there was quite a lot in the literature which seemed to support this. So, for example, an aspect of justice in organisational justice literature states that if you have certain processes and procedures that can enhance fairness in a process, then you're undertaking, you're showing that you have procedural justice. Yeah. And now if we go back to this area of PJ or procedural justice, perhaps, initially the work goes back to 1975 when we had the sort of seminal work of Thibaut and Walker, who said that, well, procedural justice is to look at the level of control that participants believe they have in a process. Yeah, if they feel that they have a high level of control, they will register a high level of procedural justice. Okay, additional literature by Colquitt, 2001, confirms this. It says that disputants viewed the procedure as fair if they perceived that they had process control. Okay, they needed enough control to present their ideas and present their case. So, I mean, looking at it a little bit like an economist, we have this notion in economics about second best. And this is kind of a little bit similar to that, because what it's saying is that you may not get the first best outcome that you want, because obviously in an organization where you have a number of stakeholders, there are often conflicting aims. However, if you have a fair process to engage in that discussion and that outcome, hopefully what you will get is that you will feel that you'll be treated procedurally fair. So whatever outcome arises, even though it's the second best outcome for you as an individual or as a group, it will be something that you would be able to accept and work with. And of course, there's a lot in the literature about fair voice process effects and how that represents a clear voice. So again, this notion of taking on voice and aligning it to the work that we were doing seemed to be a very good fit. Okay. Yeah, so I'll sort of quicken up a little bit. So the dual facilitation process was used in group workshops. The software was called Group Explorer, which at the time was produced by a company called Banksia. And what we were proposing in our research is that this process was better than just a normal sit-down focus group kind of session where everyone talks, because we thought that through the anonymity and the software-driven process and the skill set which comes from the facilitation, you had a better representation of the voice of the participants in the group. Okay, so this just as one example. After each workshop, we used to give the participants a questionnaire, and they would feedback, what they thought the outcome of the workshop was, what they felt about the process. And so, we captured some of this feedback. And there's a statement in the table below, which I'm going to move on to, and it says, unlike typical top-down processes normally found in businesses, this system allows equal participation by all. So normally, if you've got your, senior manager sitting in a group asking questions, and you've got managers at all different levels, there is a reticence to speak up and say something that might not go down well with, a more senior colleague. But because this is anonymous, it does tend to open up a freer voice. We found that it was also very useful for our BAME students at the university, because they were able to talk about the issues that they felt in a safe, comfortable, anonymous environment without having to feel that, they need to self-censor what they said. Now, although I showed you a causal map from the students, which was an assessment map, there was another map. We've had I created various maps in these sessions. There was another one which was to do with teaching abilities and how they were perceived by academics, which had quite a lot of really sort of insightful, open, I'm not going to say inflammatory, but really kind of honest comments that you just wouldn't have got if you'd asked students to vocalize what they said verbally. Okay. This is some feedback on the process that we undertook with a organisation, a business, and you can see here the sort of concept. We did it just as a causal map. So this was one of their statements. It was statement 89 at the time, where they said that they liked this process because it allowed, more feeding of thoughts from bottom up. It wasn't a very hierarchical kind of process. Everybody was treated equally. It's a good way of collecting ideas. And because it's visual as well, and it's supported with facilitation, it allows the group to discuss the understanding a little bit more holistically. It's strange because with issues that are messy, complex problems, you start off with a great big mess of thinking and ideas. You then have to break it up into different themes, work on each theme at a time, but then you can bring it all back together again, and you can look at the interconnections between all the themes. The software allows you to do that, and you then actually end up with, again, a very complex way of understanding what the issues or the problems are. Okay, so this is a causal map for one of the private organisations we worked with, and again, they assigned their own thinking to this. So you can see at the top of this causal map, we've got their goals in these oval borders. Produce profitable sales, that was one. Establish our company's reputation, and underneath that were concepts that they'd entered, and then when we discussed this with them through the facilitation, they were able to pick up some key concepts which we then highlighted and put in red, which seemed to be quite important in delivering the goals at the top. Over here this statement here, number 29, it is quite small, so I'll read it out. It says better dialogue between sales, warehouse and admin to achieve consensus and agreement. So, you know, it seems that having undergone the process, having sat through a workshop for about 2 or 3 hours, because it does take that long, they felt that there was some consensus being achieved. So it's kind of helpful to see that they're using that terminology in their own feedback on the process, which is supposed to deliver these things. Yeah. Right. So the other thing is that when I undertake focus group workshops, and you know, I'm concentrating particularly on procedural justice. Obviously, one of the things we need to do is to make sure that the treatment of the participants in the workshops is fair and shows respect and you know and is polite and so forth. So we have this issue of you know, treatment of the participants. So the process used in focus group workshops is does exhibit interpersonal fairness within the group, but also between the facilitators and the group. So this is interpersonal fairness within the group is really important. One of the ways in which I used to do that is that before a workshop started, you actually have to sit down with the participants of the group and you have to work out some group norms, how we're going to work together, you know, what's acceptable. Everybody's input and statement is valued. Nothing can be removed unless it's agreed by the whole group that it was an error. So you know, you have to, the way that this is achieved, the fair treatment of participants, is to set up rules of engagement which are negotiated with the organisation or, you know, the students prior to going into, as the workshop starts. To make sure that all the participants are treated equally, the facilitator can monitor how many concepts they put in. So we make sure that everybody has an equal voice and all the participants are allowed to enter the same number of statements, and it sort of cuts out after 5 for each one. So, you know, nobody has a louder voice than perhaps other individuals. And the use of facilitation with Group Explorer software, we think obviously improved that interpersonal fairness. Yeah. Okay. The majority of the research then was to say, okay, well, how can we actually take this a little bit further? We use the literature and try to make a connection between the determinants of procedural justice and the workshop process that we used. So the literature by Colquitt says that there are 6 determinants which will illustrate whether a process is fair, and we compared that to what we were doing in the workshops and try to sort of make a direct link. Yeah. So I did this in the form, this is shown here in the form of a table, but from the table we then developed a working model which is more visual, and that's available to view in the research which was published in 2001. So procedures should be consistently applied. Okay, so we think we do that because the laboratory system that we use informs uniformity. They should be free from bias. And as facilitators, you know, after a number of years of trying to develop this craft skill of fair facilitation, when we go into, especially into organisations, we're separate from the senior executive, and so we feel that we can be independent in that way. Accurate information is collected. Well, it's all done electronically. If there's any spelling errors or anything, we can go back and correct that. Anything needs amending, it can be changed very quickly. So incorrect information can be adjusted. Well, we can do that very easily with the electronic system. Procedures should conform to prevailing standards of ethics or morality. So we do have to say that, you know, you do have to be a trained facilitator to be able to do this. You must undertake setting up of group norms within the group that you're working on, and make sure that you uphold those group norms as a facilitator to ensure that sort of aspect is met. And then ensure the opinions of all the decision makers are included. Yes, this is why we do this. When we did it with students, what we were wanting to do is to give them a clear and transparent voice. And from that, you know, we were able to take some sort of policy outcomes which were given to the senior management team to consider in terms of what they could do to improve the academic process to support the development of the students more. There is some statistical analysis which is done to support this work. My colleague, my co-author, was the person who undertook the statistical analysis, and what he was doing was to, from the questionnaires that we used to give out to the workshop participants, we would group the questions under particular sort of themes. 12 were to do with fairness of process. 3 were to do with outcomes from the workshop, which we weren't that concerned about, but we wanted to have something to compare to. And then 3 of the questions were actually to do with the process of causal mapping itself. But our primary concern was to do with the fairness of the procedures with the 12 questions. The statistical analysis undertaken by my colleague was to try to separate out the key components which produce fairness within group decision making when it's used in this way, in group workshops with the software. And it seems that we are able to distill 2 components of fairness. Component 1 is to do with interactional fairness. And these were the questions which were to do with interactional fairness. They're all to do with improving the process of being fair. The second component that we were able to distill was to do with how clear the participant's voice is in the process. And we had sort of 3 questions that related to that. And essentially, I suppose our sort of proposition really is that for participants in the workshop, the satisfaction is a function of interactional fairness, the ability to transmit their voice clearly, and the interpersonal treatment that they've had within the workshop. And the results, again, on the statistical aspects can be looked at in the publication. But I wanted to just give a flavour of the work itself and try to talk about the causal mapping technique and the soft operational sort of research process that we use. So I hope I've been able to do that reasonably well. If I stop sharing my screen, I've gone on for a while, so it's 1:45, but I'm very happy to answer any questions that colleagues might have from what's been said, or any points of clarification, anything at all really. I'll just move over. Recording the session, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. Is that a question? Is that a hand? Yeah.
Paul.
Oh, you're muted. Paul.
Sorry, just put my microphone on. Add it off. Okay. Hi. Yeah, thanks very much for that, Parmjit. I can see there are many advantages in doing this, particularly in starting up the process, because you get everybody a fair chance and they're not sort of stamping on each other's toes and so on. But I noticed at the end, I think if I got the slide correctly, I think you had a list of benefits from 1 to 18 by the looks of it, I think, in the last couple of slides. I assume 1 is the best and 18 is the worst. Is that right?
I think, no. So I think you're talking about slide 24, sorry, 23. And that was more to do with, so what we then tried to do is we to get things published, you always need to get a little bit of statistical analysis to back up what you're saying. And this was the statistical analysis we did from the feedback that we got from, be it students or participants, after undertaking the workshop. And I said what we were trying to do is to show that there are these two key components which relate to satisfaction. And sorry, 18 was just the question.
Right. It's not the order of. I wasn't sure what these numbers actually meant. You know, was it
no? Fair enough.
Best and worst, or what?
Yeah, no, I whizzed through it really quickly. The numbers were actually just referring to our questions on the questionnaire that we gave to the participants. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, otherwise,
thanks for asking.
Puzzled. Okay, thanks.
Yes, we have another question. Sean, would you like to come in?
Hi, thank you so much. That was really useful. I wondered if we have access to the Group Explorer software at London Met. I know we have something similar called Mentimeter. I'm not sure that does the whole range of functions though.
Well, previously the software used to be called Group Decision Explorer. I think that was the sort of old model. There is a new system, a new software, which is this has been developed, and it's referred to as Strategy Finder now. Strategy Finder, all one word, .com. We don't have access to it at London Met, but I haven't put in a request that we get a license to be able to use it, hopefully for the next academic year, because then, you know, it's something that we can use either with our students or with other stakeholders that we're engaging with. Yeah. And
are you familiar with Mentimeter? Do you know if that has enough functionality to do something similar?
I'm not actually. I'm sorry.
I know we have that, and you can use that to do the anonymous inputting of, you know, answer this question, and you get three chances to make a statement, and then it's a sort of Wordle that's presented on a board. So we can definitely do that much with that. But I'm just wondering if it is the rest of it done manually by the group, or does the software do further wizardry?
Yeah, the structuring and the arrows is done manually, but the software will actually allow them to do sort of rating on things anonymously. And once they've got these maps, the software then can develop the hierarchy and sort the maps out for us. So they could become, you know, all messy and not have a hierarchy. So you can impose an analysis on top of the maps. And so I think the software helps to make the maps much more understandable. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Arvind, would you like to come in with your question?
Oh, yeah. Hi, Parmjit. Yeah, thanks a lot for a lovely presentation. And yeah, I mean, this is quite nice to see, like, okay, how you can have like a proper visual causal relationship. And like, I think Sean was asking regarding Mentimeter. So I used Mentimeter earlier as well. So Mentimeter is quite similar to what you just showed. The only difference is in Mentimeter is like live on the screen. So you can give a code to students, and they have like an app on their phones. And they can just in the real time, you can see on the screen, like in your class kind of thing, you can see the output on the screen, and it's anonymous as well. So it's quite similar to that. But Mentimeter doesn't give you that kind of a stats as well. So Mentimeter is quite limited for the feedback purpose. So it's kind of a more real-time feedback if you want from students. So like you can get on the board kind of thing. So that's a Sean's point. But like, I mean, yeah, I really like how you presented, and like the application is good for the industry as well, because
Absolutely.
industry people, they love something visual. If you give them a lot of stats, they're like, okay, yeah, that's fine, but we want to see visuals. That's nice to see like how you can use in industry as well, instead of just like a student kind of a feedback, which we use quite a lot. Like I mean, through Mentimeter, we do quite a lot. But yeah, so thanks a lot. Now we know like how to use for the industry as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Arvind. I mean, yeah, I mean, it seems like the Mentimeter is really useful for engaging students in lectures at that point in time. But with regard to how you can use this process in private organisations, it is really, they do like it, because what happens is you can if an organisation has a very contentious issue that they need to work their way through, but they need everybody on board, then sometimes the senior management team might come, you know, to the university and say, can you help facilitate us through this? So we've had lots of very tricky you know, organisational issues to deal with. One of them related to negotiating, you know, contracts with franchisees, which would involve a change in the you know, the return that they got from what the activity they were undertaking. But it is, yeah, it can be applied very lucratively as a consultancy process as well. Yeah, thank you. Right, another question. Yeah, we've got one more hand up. Yeah, Bhavan, would you like to? Yeah.
Hi, Parmjit.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed your talk, and it's a wonderful paper. I'm just wondering if you can really engage bit with Amartya Sen. Amartya Sen talks about really niti in Sanskrit means rules and regulations, and nyaya means, you know, justice, where he challenges the Eurocentric narrative of the idea of justice from John Rawls. Your paper reads like philosophically very Eurocentric. It's better to challenge Eurocentric narrative of justice, and you can use the idea of justice by Amartya Sen. And he also questions the group identity in his book Identity and Violence. So these are the two references you can engage with to make it a bit non-Eurocentric if you would like. But
absolutely.
you're
Yeah.
free to ignore
I mean,
my comments as well.
Thank you very much. I mean, how could I mean, like, what an eminent, you know, economist and the work and that he's done. So yes, definitely, I will. Actually, I have come across these kind of concepts, but I never thought about linking it directly. So it's very helpful. I might go back and look at that. I thought it relates. I mean, this kind of work, I think, is a really good way to think about engaging with students in terms of the framework that the university has, you know, the Equality for Social Justice framework and the work that we do with our students. So this was a similar thing that I was thinking of doing, you know, for the university here.
Yeah, that's the fundamental problem as far as philosophy goes. John Rawls' theory of justice focuses on institutional justice, and institutions tend to give justice within their own scope. It's not justice as we see the horizon. It's not the real justice, but institutional justice. So John Rawls focuses on institutional justice, whereas Amartya Sen moves away from Eurocentric narrative of John Rawls, expands it while making a critique of John Rawls, and says, you know, we need to follow both rules and regulations and locate justice beyond institutional parameters. So, you know, your paper actually would be a wonderful paper to challenge John Rawls and expand Amartya Sen's idea of justice.
Thank you. I will look at that, definitely. Yeah, nice for me to consider, you know, how else to examine it. Thank you for that.
I think we're nearly at 2 o'clock, and that's a great note to end on, challenging Eurocentric views of procedural justice, etc. Thank you for the good questions we had, but most of all, thank you, Parmjit, for a great presentation. I really learned something.
Okay, thank you. I just thank everyone for turning up and listening as well. Thank you, Ronki. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.